Hello, this is Brian Oughton of Apologetics315. Today I am speaking with John Stonestreet. John is the Executive Director of Summit Ministries, found at summit.org. He's a popular speaker at camps, conventions, and conferences, and he works annually with thousands of parents, teachers, and students on developing a biblical worldview, understanding comparative worldviews, and defending the Christian faith. The purpose of our interview today is to glean from John's experience as an apologist, gain some insights about the role of worldviews and culture, and learn more about Summit Ministries and the impact they're having. Thanks for speaking with me today, John.
Listen, it's great to be with you. Thanks, Brian.
Now, I know of you through Summit Ministries and also through your Think Again podcast with Randall Niles, but could you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Sure. I grew up in a Christian home, and kind of the typical story where I was kind of raised in the Christian faith and never really heard any other voices against it. And sometimes the things that we're raised in were least equipped to defend or understand. And so when those beliefs come under attack, a lot of us aren't really ready for that. And that really happened to me as a freshman. I went off to a college that was Christian in orientation. In fact, their motto was, "Thy word is truth." And yet the first semester in class, they taught us that the miracles in the Gospels had been fabricated to embellish the Gospel story. So, I guess for a college, where the motto was, "Thy word is truth," they didn't believe it was. And I wasn't prepared to defend that. And through a number of circumstances, I ended up at another college called Bryan College in southeast Tennessee. And the first class I was signed up for there was Biblical Worldview. And that really was a turning point for me. It was the first time I realized that Christianity had something to do with my brain, not just how I felt. And that there were other worldviews that actually had good reasons behind them also, and that we needed to understand not only our faith, but the other ones, and why Christianity can stand up to the challenges that the other worldviews present. And that just really started a journey, which culminated in, after college, getting connected with Summit Ministries. And, of course, what we do is work with high school and college students primarily, but also parents, teachers, educators of all sorts, in helping prepare students for this battle of the mind. And so that's really been the story. It's actually through Summit that I met my wife. We now live out in Colorado Springs. I taught at the college level for a few years, and about 3.5 years ago we moved out here. And we have 3 daughters of ages 5, 3, and 1. And we're just even right now in the middle of our Summit sessions, where we're preparing students to know why they believe what they believe and defend their faith as they walk into culture.
Well, that's great. Well, I have 2 daughters, 3 and 1, so
nice.
It's a really fun time. Now, talking about Summit, well, from what I know about Summit Ministries, I would call it sort of a worldview boot camp, training believers in apologetics, get them equipped for contemporary culture, and kind of showing how Christianity is relevant to their lives. But I know that I only have a small idea of what you guys are doing, so can you tell me more about it and how it got started? What sort of work does it do, and what does that look like in reality?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you nailed kind of the central program that we have pretty well, and that is we hold kind of our center identity since our inception. And actually, Summit was founded 48 years ago now by a man named David Noble, who's the author of a very important book on worldviews called Understanding the Times. But David was a Bible college grad that back nearly 50 years ago went off to work on a PhD in philosophy at the University of Wisconsin, and he almost walked away from his faith. After a Bible college degree, he wasn't equipped to deal with Marxist philosophy. And he figured if that happened to him, it's probably happening to others. And so he had this vision to give students kind of a mini academy before they went off to college, or give them a place, as their faith is being attacked, to come and to really learn why Christianity is a worldview, what the other worldviews are, and how this whole battle of ideas looks in real life and culture, and then how you can defend the Christian worldview. And that really was what Summit was for most of its history. In the middle of the 80s, the Summit had grown to, a couple sessions each summer, 200 or 300 kids, and a well-known Christian leader named James Dobson heard about it and actually made his son Ryan come. And there's a whole funny story behind that. It was somewhat of a bribe from, the great Christian psychologist James Dobson. But at the end of the day, his son didn't want to came, and it blew him away, and he went back, and since then, Ryan has always been a part of the Summit in one way or the other. Ryan right now, of course, is a Christian speaker and apologist in his own right and speaks for us still, but that really blew him away, and that led to Dr. Dobson putting Summit on Focus on the Family radio, and of course you can imagine what might have happened after that when Dr. Dobson was, in the 80s. The influence he had was really astounding. And that really exploded the Summit. So the Summit immediately grew to 7 full sessions, even 8 full sessions. And so now we run about 1,600 students through our Summit Conference. Our primary location is in Colorado Springs, Colorado, but we've also branched out and we host 2-week conferences that are, again, the same thing, boot camps for high school and college students on worldview, apologetics, and philosophy. We hold them in Tennessee and Wisconsin. But that also gave birth to a publishing arm that gave birth to a whole curriculum department. So now we actually have curriculum for Christian schools and homeschool families that will train them in biblical worldview from first grade all the way through 12th grade. And it takes them through the sequence of understanding a biblical worldview to applying a biblical worldview to culture, society, history, law, government, to defending the Christian worldview. And we've also developed programs for people after they come to our Summit program. We have a 3-month gap year program designed to identify and mobilize a new generation of Christian leaders. And we also have a study program at Oxford University where college students can go and do a semester at Oxford, bolster their academic credentials, and get into better grad schools. And the way this all fits with who we are is we realize that college is a very hostile place for Christians. And the reason is that students aren't prepared to defend themselves against the challenges of hostile Christian professors. So we deal with it 2 ways. Number one is we look to prepare students to know the battle they're going to face before they get there at college and face these challenges. The second way we do it is we're trying to raise a new generation of college professors to replace the old ones when they die or retire. So, we think that Christianity has a place in the academy, has a place in the public square, has a place in politics and law and economics. And so we're looking to mobilize a generation of leaders who can reclaim some of these areas that we've lost.
Mm-hmm. Backing up just a bit on the Summit events. Now, I understand the concept, and that's cool, but I mean, if a young person, say high school graduate, signs up to go to a Summit conference or event, how long are they going there? What are they getting into? Is this a summer camp? Is this,
Yeah, we have the strangest youth conference in America, probably in the West, where students actually come to one of our facilities, and we use a Christian college campus in Tennessee, and we use a conference center in Wisconsin. We have our own facility, which is an old turn-of-the-century hotel in Colorado Springs, but it goes something like this. Students come and sit in class for 7 hours a day for 2 weeks and hear talks from some of the world leaders in apologetics, philosophy, and worldview. They hear talks for 7 hours a day, and they love it. I mean, it's amazing. It's not your typical smoke and mirrors and loud music and jumping up and down and all that. I mean, we have a great time. We have a full activities thing that they can take advantage of. But really the core of what we do is to help students prepare for the world of ideas. And what we found is that most people think, well, that's just way over most students' heads. And it is, but it's not because the ideas are too tall. It's because that students are too short. And we've never challenged them to think deeper. And when they come and they think deeper, they actually find out they love it, and they can't wait for more. And so it's a strange concept, but, we take care of them, we feed them well, we put them in a great Christian community. They're surrounded by people who care for them and take their questions seriously. We tell our students that they're allowed to ask questions here as long as they do it in the right way. Even ones that they're allowed to disagree with us. We're allowed to kind of fight things out as long as we do it with a spirit of respect. And they really appreciate this. They really appreciate going deeper than they normally do.
What's the youngest age or that someone can get in there, and what is the typical age that attends?
We really shoot for 16 to 25-year-olds. We will allow some 15-year-olds to sneak in if they're ready. And we have students that come through, and I say through 25, that's kind of what we aim for, but we have, PhD students that come to it, and we have, pastors and youth pastors and grandmothers and parents. And so there's really no upper end. I would say the typical average age of one of our sessions would be around, 17, 18, 19, 20, something like that. So students that are really just headed to college or in their first couple years of college, that's really the kind of the main group that we get. So parents that are interested in preparing their students in these areas before they go and face these challenges. Or, we often get a lot of students who are in the middle of it. They've already gone to college. They don't know how to defend their faith. I was just talking actually today at lunch with a girl who will be a sophomore next year at a liberal Christian college in the Midwest. And she said, she was in an Old Testament course, and the professor rattled her faith because he basically talked her out of the reliability of the Old Testament. And so she heard about this program through some friends and thought it would be a good place, and she said, I'm just glad to be at a place who can help me ask these questions and give me answers.
Now, this might be a big question, but try to narrow it down. What do you think are the main challenges that are facing our youth culture today?
I think there's 3 or 4 that I like to identify. The first one is really unique of all generations that have ever walked the face of the earth. It's unique to this one. And I'm not saying there's anything new under the sun, but we live in the age of information, which is the age of competing ideas. And it's not just that we get these ideas, it's that we live in the noisiest culture in the history of the world where all of these ideas are coming at us all the time. And for some of us, we've kind of lived in that transition. When I graduated from college, we didn't email. Now I do email, but I can kind of see this transition from a pre-internet to a pre-internet to an internet generation. This generation has never known anything other than noise. And like I said, there's no new idea under the sun, as Solomon said, but it's one thing to have an idea. It's another thing to get bombarded with a million ideas at once, all uncontextualized, all unargued, all unsubstantiated. And what does that mean? And the church has kind of a modus operandi of saying we're going to proclaim truth. And, of course, some do that better than others. But even those that do the truth part well sometimes forget that if you just dump true information into a sea of information, it gets drowned out. And so for those of us that work with students and are interested in acquiring the truth, we need to realize that we are just one stop on the information bus of the week, and there's a lot of stops. And so we not only need to give them truth, we have to equip them with discernment. C.S. Lewis said the most dangerous ideas in a society aren't the ones that are being argued, but the ones that are assumed. So these students leave our church, and they go get on the Internet, and then they watch a movie, and then they listen to a podcast, and then they listen to music, and then they walk into a store where they have advertisements coming at them, and ideas are being thrown at them all the time. They're not being argued, but they're all assuming things that are true or false, that are genuine or counterfeit, that are life-giving or life-stealing, that are humanizing or dehumanizing. And so I think that's one of the first challenges, is getting past all the noise and helping students realize that all ideas aren't created equal. Mm-hmm. I think a second big challenge that young people today face is that we live in a generation where it's normal not to think. This is what Neil Postman called the generation that amuses itself to death. In other words, we live for distraction. The great artist and the great works of art, the great works of literature were all designed to make us think deeper about our lives, to think deeper thoughts and ask better questions. And today, entertainment, media, pop art is designed to make us not think. And I think that there's a big difference between a generation where it's normal to think and a generation where it's normal not to think. I mean, if you went up to the average person on the street and asked who their politician was or what bill just got passed in their parliament or their Congress, most people couldn't answer that question. But if you asked them who was the star of that movie or, who got voted off, American Idol or something like that, they know right away. And that just means we're a dumb generation. I don't know how else to put it. Neil Postman got it right, I think. And I think that's a huge challenge, because a dumb generation in a dumb generation in the age of information is destined to be deceived and maybe even tyrannized. So that's the second thing. And I think a third big challenge is really low expectations. And what I mean by that is we live in an age of information. So unfortunately, many students' experience with information, with the church, is that this is Christian information. We live in an age of entertainment, so their experience with Christianity is that it's Christian entertainment. And we live in an age where people don't think, and we just want to, amuse them. And so now we kind of replace that with the Christian version of that. And we don't expect people to think good thoughts. Think deep thoughts, act, make great decisions, and I really think that the church has made a big mistake on this one. And I'm using the church obviously generically because obviously some don't do it quite well. But what I mean is that we have tolerated a culture that really lives in perpetual adolescence. We never want to grow up. We never want to take responsibility for our actions. Just tell me what to believe and I'll believe it. Tell me what to think. What do I need to study for the test, sort of stuff. And then that's what we kind of give them in Christian form. And I think that's a big challenge for this generation. So, I could also list, the idea that truth is under attack and that people don't believe in the inerrancy of Scripture and that Darwinism is won today and we read like Jacques Derrida, not like Christians. And those are all big issues too, but I think those kind of the cultural context have presented a big challenge for those of us who really want to be serious about being disciples and making disciples.
Well, that being said, what areas do you think that pastors or teachers, spiritual leaders, what areas should they focus their attention on?
Well, we're a worldview ministry, and sometimes to our hammer everything looks like a nail. And let me clarify what I mean by worldview. I don't just mean the rational side, because a worldview is not just our philosophy. It's our fundamental orientation to life. It's what we love and what we think about and what we value, what we invest in. That's all determined by how we understand life in the world. And I think one of the things that we really need to understand is that discipleship is not giving people moral lessons so that they can add good behavior to their life. Real discipleship biblically is that we're transformed by the renewing of our mind. So in my mind, discipleship from a biblical definition is establishing people in a biblical world and life view. It's not knowing the Scriptures. It's knowing everything through the Scriptures. It's not memorizing Bible verses. It's being able to think biblically. And sometimes our methods, which are really good, like memorizing the Scripture and that sort of thing, is kind of seen as the end, when really it's the means. And the larger question is, do we think, believe, love, relate, and decide and act as a Christian? Not can I regurgitate facts, not can I regurgitate Bible verses, not can I tell you what Christians ought to believe, but do I really approach life in the world as a Christian? And that's where worldview comes in. And what that means is we have to do some hard, fast questioning about the beliefs that our people have. And that's where apologetics comes in my mind, and that's where worldview studies comes in. One of the things we tell our students, maybe this will make a little bit of sense, Brian, one of the things we tell our students is that the battle of ideas is mostly the battle over definitions. So we have a generation of students who define words in ways that aren't helpful. So, for example, truth is defined as a belief rather than truth being that which corresponds to reality. Or you could say, love, I think, is a key one. In our world, especially in Western culture, with the proliferation of kind of goofy romantic movies and pop diva music, love is just a feeling. And so sometimes then when people say I love Jesus, what they mean is I have a strong feeling about Jesus. Well, sometimes that feeling goes away. In fact, you see that in marriages. If love is just a feeling, what do you do when the feeling is gone? That's a bad definition of love. Love is the commitment that I make to another person for their sake, not for my sake, and the feeling follows the decision. In our culture, the decision follows the feeling, which is why so many marriages don't make it in the West. So that's the sort of discipleship that we need to do, is go back and struggle with how do people defining words? What do they understand truth to be? And does this correspond with what the Scriptures say and with reality?
Well, I suppose it really does come down to being Christ-like and making disciples as Christ commanded.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we've kind of separated those, haven't we? We said, well, theology, that's just for the smart people. Apologetics, that's just for the people who want to argue. No. If we're going to be like Christ, it means that we love Him with heart, soul, and mind, all of us. I can't just say, well, I'm a feeler, so therefore I don't have to think, any more than I can say I'm a thinker, and therefore I don't have to feel. It's holistic discipleship in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about the concept of worldviews. I know that plays a huge role in Summit's approach, and we've kind of been talking about it a bit here, but how would you define a worldview?
Well, a worldview is kind of best understood as the set of assumptions that we have, whether we realize them or not. We have them, and it's through those assumptions that we understand life in the world and then make our decisions. So there's a number of things there to unpack. The first thing is that everyone has a set of assumptions that guide how they understand and see the world. I mean, you've probably, in fact, I know you probably have, and many of the listeners probably have been in a conversation with people, and they're talking about something like truth, and in the middle of it they realize, wait a minute, we don't even mean the same thing by the word truth. Or, I believe in God, and then you realize midway through that you're not talking about the same God at all, because all of us have these assumptions about where we came from and why we're here and what the meaning of life is and what's the definition of a good life and what happens when we die, where is history going, what's a human being, why are we different than the animals, are we different than the animals? And these are all assumptions that we have. Sometimes we don't ever think about them cognitively. I mean, if you went up to somebody on the street and said, hey, what's your worldview, they probably would look at you strange and want to run away. But if you went up to them and said, what's the meaning of life, or why should I wake up in the morning, or why is life worth living, they would have answers to these questions. And what they saw as the answers would dictate their values. So, for example, if someone believed that when you die, you just die and there's not going to be any judgment, that's going to impact the sort of decisions they make today. On the other hand, if someone believes that they're just trying to appease a God who is jealous and vengeful, and anyone who doesn't believe in him is actually an infidel and not worth living, now that's where you get what drives the radical side of Islam. If you think that when you die you're going to come back as another life form based on the good or bad that you did in this life, you're probably going to try to, do something good so you come back as something majestic and not a tapeworm. In other words, your value, your fundamental assumptions shape your life. And it also not only shapes how you live, but it shapes how you interpret life. So when bad things happen, is it an accident? Is it God's fault? Is it your fault? Do you just need to work harder? Can you blame it on someone else? This all is your worldview. That's the power of a worldview. It's not these aren't beliefs you ever really look at very often. They're beliefs that you look through. And they shade life. And so, to a Buddhist, things look Buddhist. And to a Christian, things look like Christians. And so a lot of times we use the analogy of prescription lenses, whether contact lenses or glasses. And that's a really good one because, a prescription lens will either bring the world into focus or it will make the world unclear. It will either make the world fuzzy and blurry, or it would actually bring the world into focus. So an important question isn't, do I have a worldview? An important question is, which worldview do I have, and am I actually seeing reality clearly? And there are worldviews competing for our heart and mind and attention. And that's why it's important to back up and say, how do I see the world, and is it true?
Now, you've written a book dealing with worldviews. Can you tell me a bit about that book, and how do you think worldview plays a role in apologetics and evangelism?
Sure. Yeah, great question. Well, the book I learned worldview from is a book called Making Sense of Your World, and it was written by two of my former professors, Bill Brown and Gary Phillips, and it was a book that was part of a class that changed my life, the one that I mentioned earlier. And about 3 or 4 years ago, one of the authors of the book came to me and said, it's been about 12 years since we revised this book, and it's way overdue. And, of course, since then, postmodernism and Islam had really hit the world scene. And so he said, we really need to revise it. Would you be interested? And so we did. We jumped into it and really shook the book up a good bit. It's called Making Sense of Your World, a Biblical Worldview. And the book does 3 things. The first thing that it does is it defines what the worldviews are and defines tests for evaluating worldviews. So what is a worldview? What are the worldviews? And how do you choose? The second section commends a biblical worldview. In other words, the point of that section is to say, why should a biblical worldview be taken seriously? And if so, what is a biblical worldview? And then the third one is an attempt to really apply a biblical worldview to 4 key areas: ourselves, our families, our churches, and our culture. And so that's what the book does. Now, what is the role of apologetics, for example? In my mind, a worldview is how you see the world. Apologetics, then, is defending components of your worldview. And so apologetics can be defensive or offensive. A worldview is trying to pull the pieces together and say, this is how I see the world. This is how I ought to see the world. Apologetics would look at aspects of those beliefs and defend them. So, for example, we are to see the world through the lens of redemption. Apologetics would defend the fact that Jesus was the Son of God and that he actually rose from the dead. Apologetics would also then go and take on certain tenets of other worldviews like atheism and Buddhism, who have different understandings of what the history of the world is about. And so that's the role of apologetics. And what that does is it helps me defend my worldview in the context of the battle or the arena of ideas. And secondly, it allows me to meet someone of another worldview and try to compel them to take seriously the Christian claims to reality. So it does work in both my personal Christian formation, loving God with my mind, thinking deeply about life, and also the process of evangelism as well.
Now, you've had lots of first-hand experience dealing with youth and tough questions and current issues. So, from an advice standpoint, what kind of advice would you give to the next generation of Christian apologists, and what do you think they should be particularly attentive to?
Well, I think, the last 10 years has meant that we have seen on a world scale, and part of this is just what's happened, and part of this is the media that's put it in front of all of our attention. But it's put on a grand scale the problem of evil. Everything from the tsunami to Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans to the series of earthquakes in Pakistan and Haiti, as well as, moral evil, acts of moral evil of genocide and war, which means we're going to have a really good explanation for the problem of evil. And we're going to have to be able to do it in a way that takes into account how do I want to put this? We're going to have to do it in a way that shows and commends the idea that we live in a fallen context. I think sometimes Christian apologists want to make evil so easily explained and put into various categories, and therefore we can provide, an answer. But the problem of evil is not just rational; it's very existential, and that's especially true for a postmodern generation. In other words, evil is not just something we see; it's something we feel. And some people call this the problem of suffering. And I think we got to take that seriously. Evil on a world scale, evil on a large scale, and then evil that is just gratuitous and senseless, like what we saw in Haiti. Those are really tough questions. I think, secondly, we need to be able to do some work in epistemology. In other words, how can we know what we know as Christians? And, of course, the modernist idea that scientific rationalism can bring us all truth has been discredited. That's a good thing. The bad thing is that we're left without foundations for any truth in the postmodern generation. And so we need to rebuild the viability of the concept of revelation, the truth of the Scriptures, the explanatory power of the Christian worldview. And I think we need to take seriously the concept that the battle of worldviews is often the battle over the big stories. In other words, we can say, okay, Jesus rose from the dead, and the Bible is historically verifiable, but these apologetics truths need to be contextualized in the story of creation, fall, and redemption, because that makes sense of the human condition. And I really think that the thing that is most compelling about the Christian worldview is that it gets the human condition right. You know, if atheism were true, then humans are nothing but animals. We should just behave like animals, and it shouldn't bother us when we behave like animals. You know, and if Oprah and the New Agers are right, then we should be God, and the more we look inside, the better we get. And, of course, we've seen neither one of those things are true. What the Christian story, of course, says is that we're made in the image of God, and then we turn around and act like animals, and that's why it bothers us. And so, you know, I'm thinking now of, one of the lines from Blaise Pascal, that humans are the glory and the garbage of the universe. I think there's a lot of work left to be done on the human person, what gives humans value, what makes the most sense of the human condition. And so to me, there's so many areas of work, whether in social issues like abortion and bioethics, cultural avenues like fashion and online online living, dealing with issues of Second Life and Facebook and human relationships. So, there's social and cultural things. There's scientific and technological things. There's moral issues. And then there's just the idea of how can I know who I am? And, of course, that's what we get from the Scriptures. When we meet God, then that's when we really meet ourselves. So in my mind, those are the areas that really deserve a lot of attention.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's helpful. One of the things we talked about earlier, and you just mentioned again there, was culture and media. So another question I would have would be, how do you think Christian apologists should be aware of contemporary media, what's going on in culture, and be able to adapt and contextualize their message so that they're relevant and that they're able to relate well?
Well, I think it's the responsibility of Christians to be involved in anything of aesthetics and beauty and truth, and of course that's the role of the arts. And so I think there's a huge role to be played for Christians in the arts, and that includes, media and entertainment and kind of what you might call the popular arts. And I think that's for two reasons. Number one is that's the conversation that culture is having. So, if we don't enter the conversation, we're missing some unbelievable opportunities. People don't think deep thoughts about the world, but they listen to Coldplay sing about deep thoughts about the world. And so that's just a great open door for us to jump in and have those conversations. On the other hand, there is a difference between getting involved in the conversations and losing the truth in the conversation. And so the idea that we need to use movie clips and we need to replace entertainment with just Christian entertainment, unfortunately what that does is it just adds another layer to the noise. And what I think is that Christians have a huge role to be those who go into the noise and start bringing clarity by saying, what does this movie mean? What is it saying about the meaning of life? Rather than just trying to add, instead of going to that movie, go to our movie instead. People who take that approach really miss what entertainment really does to a culture. When all of a culture's cultural expressions are reduced to entertainment, that's just a bad sign that culture is a silly one. It cares about things that aren't important and doesn't care about things that are. And so entertainment and media and movies give us a great place to jump in and start pointing to things that are more important. Jumping into reality TV and showing why it's not necessarily real reality. Jumping into definitions of goofy romantic comedies of love and commitment, and actually adding substance there and questioning. And so, I love this image that we get of Jesus in the Gospels, where people come to him asking questions, often about the culture, and Jesus turns around and asks a better question. What I don't want to do is just take noise and add it to noise. What I want to do is jump into the noise and start asking some really good questions. It's what Socrates did. It's what Jesus did. And it's a really effective way to engage media and entertainment. In other words, I guess another way to put this, to kind of simplify it, is rather than using a movie clip as an illustration, let's take the movie clip and tear it apart. I mean, not always negatively, but just kind of tear it apart about its assumptions and its definitions and ask good questions. And that's a great way, in my experience, to make students think deeper and to help students turn around and minister to other students about the gospel. Is through the lens of these things.
Back to Summits and its programs. Tell us what programs Summit has coming up and how young people can get involved in them.
Sure. Yeah, we're just in the middle of our summer conference schedule. We have 10 of those, and there's several that are left, and we've got a little space left in a few of them. So, even in the months of July and August, we have some programs that if you have a student aged 16 and up, 15 and up, and you feel like they need this sort of information, then there's, you can find the details out about our summer conferences at summit.org. And then in the fall, several of us will be at different locations around the country, around the world even, doing talks and seminars and conferences. We'll be involved this fall with the National Apologetics Conference that Southern Evangelical Seminary will be sponsoring in Charlotte and in Kansas City, and that'll also be simulcast, so many of the listeners across the ocean there could listen and watch it. Some great Christian apologists going to be involved in that event, and so are we. And then we also, our gap year program called Summit Semester, which again is trying to identify, just a handful of gifted potential Christian scholars, put them in a learning environment, give them the foundations of the great ideas before sending them off to finish their degrees. That program starts up in September, and we still have a limited amount of space for that program. So those are all things that people can check out. And then we're always updating our website with different worldview things going on in the news and culture and articles and things like that. And so all of that stuff is available on summit.org.
At the beginning of the interview, I mentioned your podcast with Randall Niles. Would you mind mentioning that and where people can find other resources of yours online? Yeah,
absolutely. Randall's a good friend of mine, and he and I decided a couple months ago to just sit down and do some worldview rap sessions, and we've had a great time. That podcast is called Think Again, and they can find that on allaboutgod.com, which is Randall's homepage, and also summit.org. You can find it on our page under resources. So, we try to spin out several new ones per month, and I think we've got a library of about 20 shows already. And we just basically take on an issue and take on a question or take on some aspect of culture, and we try to bring a Christian worldview and Christian apologetics to bear. A lot of fun. Randall really knows his stuff, and of course his work on the web is legendary. And they can find those, and there'll be more to come. I know we'll record again here in a couple weeks and get 3 or 4 more out there.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today, John. It's been good.
Well, listen, I appreciate your work, and thanks so much for bringing people's attention to Summit. And if there's anything we can ever do for you or the audience, just let us know. God's gifted us and blessed us to be a resource kind of center for tough questions, and that's why we're there.
Well, we've been speaking with John Stonestreet of Summit Ministries, and you can find all of his resources linked at today's blog post at Apologetics315. And for more information about Summit, you can go to summit.org. So if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave some positive feedback in iTunes, and don't forget that all the past interviews with apologists can be found in the iTunes or the RSS feeds linked at the blog. This is Brian Oughton of Apologetics315, and thanks for listening.